Elon Musk hosting Saturday Night Live is like it's
Just right into it.
It's like no, it's like because I wish that the listeners could have gotten my raw reaction to just finding that out.
It was so visceral.
It's like it's like the type of thing engineered in a lab to piss me off. And because I have to watch it. I have to watch it. How could you not watch it?
I'm not gonna watch it.
Oh, well,
it's
maybe
very easy for me.
Maybe I just hate myself more. Just let's change the subject. Let's just
and that's the show.
It is the middle of the week. It is definitely not the weekend night where we record the Patreon episode together. It is Wednesday, Thursday, possibly Friday.
Who knows what day it is?
Whenever you're listening to it, is that it's live. Baby.
We're here with you. Live from New York. Nobody here is in New York. That was just want to make that clear because I've been accused of being in New York.
Just settle in, have a drink.
Yeah,
we're gonna be
curl
here
up with your jewel.
Yeah, I'm gonna need a few.
I have a little cocktail I just made. I mixed wine.
What?
I mixed 2 types of Riesling, cheap Riesling.
That's
together.
normal.
Why?
Because
they do that.
the bottle ran out.
Okay.
When I was pouring the glass.
Makes sense.
I'm gonna mix it in my tummy.
I was at the liquor store the other day, and I was buying a bottle of gin and a bottle of Bailey's. And I had a little joke to myself on the way out about how these are my AMs and my PMs. You know what I'm saying? But it's just the kind of sad, quiet joke I make to myself as I exit the liquor store.
You should do that as like a SNL monologue.
Yeah, they should get you on there, honestly.
Oh,
exactly.
God.
The same day as Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Do you remember when? I don't know if you guys. You guys aware of the fact that I guess it would have had to be the 90s. Yeah, it was when Steve Forbes ran for president. That Steve Forbes was the host. Steve Forbes was the host of SNL that week, and the musical guest was Rage Against the Machine, which is like,
what
a mix that is.
That's cool.
Yeah,
I love that.
I can't believe Saturday Night Live is still in the air, honestly.
I mean, I think it's like most people like it. It's like
I know
pop music, It's just something that most people like.
I know, and I hate it, and I just
I haven't watched it in a very long time.
It's bad. I watch more than I should. I'm punishing myself mostly. I don't watch it every week, but like when Elon Musk is hosting it, I just know, like that was my visceral reaction because I just know that perhaps I hate myself enough to know that I'm going to watch it, right? And I know, I
feel like I have to watch it because everybody's going to be talking about it, but I don't want.
I have to subject myself to it. Oh, it's just so epic, the epic meme billionaire on the.
I usually only watch
meme.
Good stuff, so
hell yeah. And then Grimes isn't even the musical guest. Come on.
What a like snub to her.
I know, really, right?
That's so rude.
Miley Cyrus.
It's sexism, really. Somehow.
Supposedly, yeah, I guess, yeah. It's sexism, goddammit.
That's right.
Let's say that.
Feminism podcast.
The thing about Elon Musk too is that I just don't like. In addition to just like this, just generally, just my visceral dislike of him, I just don't even see how. Is Elon Musk funny? Like, even like, I think
people think he's funny.
What are the bits going to be? What are the sketches going to be? Because the host is typically in every sketch.
Oh, you know what? 100%. He'll be like a scientist in one. He'll be like a smart scientist.
They're gonna do one where he's like Tony Stark in one. I bet.
I'd bet
they'll
do one where he's like Iron Man. Yeah.
God damn it! I'm sorry.
I mean, that's how most people like view him. Like he's like a Tony Stark kind of figure, but that also does like memes. Maybe he'll do one. Remember when it was like really popular on Halloween for people to do like meme costumes, where they would put like the image macro text on like a piece of like cardboard or whatever, and like walk around with it all night. Maybe he'll do that. Maybe he'll be Dogecoin. Maybe, maybe he'll like make an NFT of the episode and like just torch an acre of rainforest. Anything could happen. Anything goes when you got Tony Stark hosting SNL, baby. Going to Mars. Going to Mars.
To the moon, baby.
Yeah, to the moon.
To the moon.
Baby.
Fuck.
It'd be really funny if he like says something that can be taken as like stock manipulation. He gets like fined for it. Like he like tells people to like buy GameStop stock on TV or like Tesla stock. That would be cool.
I'm like, honestly, like I don't know why this has hit me so, but that was really like a gut punch. Honestly, when I just read,
it's happening to you personally.
It is. They're doing it to you
in real time. I'm being punished by this.
Why would they do this?
I don't know. This is fucked up.
Lorne Michaels is sick.
I know. These people are sick.
He can't get away with it,
and I'm the real victim here.
Yeah. It's fucked up. I've never seen you this like affected by
this is like a real reaction. Yeah.
So funny, dude.
Like
this is your personal 9/11.
This is
I'll never forget where I was the day that I found out that Elon Musk.
It's the most epic. It's the most epic meme there's ever been. It's an epic meme come to real life.
They're definitely gonna say it's like welcome to the most epic episode of SNL. Baby, or however they intro it. I have not watched SNL.
Musical guest Bacon.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh God.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everybody, to Eat the Rich, the show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Shane, and tonight we have with us Chris.
Howdy.
And Carrie.
Hello. That was great, honey.
You did a good job. Yeah.
Thank you. It's so weird. You hear it over and over.
I remember I did it once. I did it one time previously on an episode, and I literally think I just gave up halfway through. It's like, in the late stage, whatever, shit.
There was one other time I did it, and I left out one of the words. And then I listened to it back, and I was like, motherfucker. I was so mad at myself.
It's funny that, and it's admirable that Dwight just like does it every single time, because it's like when I had like my little short-lived podcast, like I think we each just did it one time, and then Ralph would just like cut it in. We like never did it again. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's, but it's more authentic to do it every time like Dwight does, and we miss him.
Hell yeah.
Every time. Well, anyway. Today we're talking diamonds, baby.
The beers.
And Carrie, this episode was sort of your brainchild. If you want to set us up here.
Yeah, it was something that I've been interested in for a while, and I realized while I was doing research, what probably initially sparked my interest in this. Diamonds are such like a cultural staple, and you always like wonder how that happened. And I think when I was a teenager was when they really ramped up like attention being brought to conflict diamonds, and in particular there was something that we'll touch on during the episode where De Beers was like relocating people in the interest of diamond mining, and I think that was what initially kind of made me interested in this, because there were some celebrities that then got involved in that with some NGOs that were trying to like fix that situation. But yeah, it's just such like it's like an unquestioned cultural norm that for certain life events you're gonna get a diamond. And who did that? And it's De Beers and the Oppenheimer family. They did that. That's it, baby. Okay, so I think, Chris, you were going to talk about kind of like the early beginnings of the company, if you want to get into that.
Sure. Yeah, no, De Beers did that. And I think that, I guess what we're going to sort of get into ultimately, like sort of the open secret of the diamond industry is, and it's like even more true today, but it was also true even like 150 years ago when this story begins, is that diamonds like aren't actually really worth anything.
Right.
Like actually, like they used to be. I mean, sure they have industrial uses. They do have their value as far as that goes. But as far as like any kind of like intrinsic value due to scarcity or anything like that, they don't really have them anymore. Like they're not scarce. So that story, I mean, that's sort of been amplified over the 20th century. But that sort of, so it was South Africa in the late 1800s was when there was sort of a large deposit of diamonds discovered there, and that sort of is the beginnings of diamonds actually becoming not rare or scarce or actually having any real intrinsic value. And then, De Beers is the company that realized that and sort of like over the past century has, with that little kernel of truth in mind, has sort of, built their own little monopoly on the diamond industry and, geared all their marketing towards giving it this sort of intrinsic value that it doesn't actually have. So I wanted to read a little bit from, I don't actually have an author on this. It's some sort of paper I found online. It's from, it looks like nyu.edu, but I don't actually have an author on this paper here, but I thought it sort of summarized some of the early years of the De Beers company pretty well. It's called De Beers and Beyond: The History of the International Diamond Cartel. And I'm going to start from this spot right here. It says Diamonds and the Cartel. This is like the little heading here. And it says, for centuries, the only two countries producing diamonds were India and Brazil. Up to the middle of the 19th century, the world supply of diamonds was so scarce that even monarchs and noblemen found it hard to get hold of them. The idea of making diamonds available to the general public seemed unthinkable. When diamonds were first found in South Africa in 1867, however, supply increased rapidly, although the notion of diamonds as a precious and rare commodity remained to the present day. Similar to the gold miners of California, diamond miners in South Africa tended to rush to the latest finding. As a matter of principle, diamond miners preferred to work by themselves. However, the scarcity of resourceful land and the need for a minimum of common infrastructure forced them to live together in limited areas. In order to fight off latecomers and to settle disputes, diggers' committees were formed and gave out claims in a region. Each digger would be allocated one claim or at most two. Since digging diamonds on a larger scale was virtually impossible for individuals, small claim holders soon merged into larger ones. Moreover, equipment for digging, hauling the dirt up and pumping water out of the mines was purchased or rented by a group of miners, thereby forced to cooperate even more intensively. Cecil Rhodes was one of the first businessmen to rent out pumping equipment and soon realized that he had tapped a vast market potential. So Cecil Rhodes is going to be the one who ends up being the head of De Beers, in its infancy and for its first couple of years. And the way he got started, as it mentions here in the South African diamond mines, was that these were mines that were like big open pit mines, and when you dig them out, they fill up with groundwater. So the way he kind of got started in this industry was by renting the water pumps that would be used to pump the water out of the mine, and then sort of eventually he just started buying diamond fields of his own because he'd made so much money. So it says here, Cecil Rhodes was one of the first businessmen to rent out pumping equipment and soon realized that he had tapped a vast market potential. He had reinvested the initial proceeds from equipment rental in acquiring claims. By 1880, he held a large enough share of diamond claims to justify a separate company purely concerned with managing the mines. Thus, De Beers Mining Company was created. By 1887, the company was the sole owner of South African diamond mines. And it got the name De Beers, by the way, so it was two Dutch settlers in South Africa named Diedrich and Johannes De Beer, who were it was their farm that the diamonds were originally found on. So the name De Beer is just like the name of the people who initially owned the plot of land that would become the De Beer diamond mine, and then eventually the De Beer company. The guys who owned the land actually don't seem to have gotten too much out of it at all. Don't seem to have been the ones who were in charge of the company in any sort of capacity. So going on and reading more here, it says, concurrently, Cecil Rhodes took control of the distribution channels through the Diamond Syndicate, an alliance of merchants in Kimberley, South Africa, who abided to Rhodes's terms of business, recognizing that their own interests and De Beers were compatible in that both aimed for high prices and a notion of scarcity. So by this point, I mean, just the fact that this huge cache of diamonds had been discovered in South Africa, I mean, they're already aware, at this point, by the late 1800s, that the intrinsic value of diamonds as a scarce commodity is already on the way down, right? Because previously, most of the diamonds in the world were mined out of, only two places, India and Brazil, as was mentioned earlier. And they find this huge cache of them in Africa. And then throughout the 20th century, they find a lot more. There was 1957, there was a large quantity discovered in Siberia. In 1991, even more in Canada. So sort of the whole, as we'll get into, I'm sure, the whole history of the De Beers company and the Oppenheimer fortune has been sort of predicated on this artificial scarcity in the diamond market that they create, because there actually is not a scarcity at all, really. And so reading on here, it says, in the following 3 decades, a German immigrant named Ernest Oppenheimer establishes himself as a prominent figure in the South African diamond and gold industry. After some time as a diamond expert, he entered the gold business by creating the Anglo-American Corporation of South Africa, by the way, with funding from J.P. Morgan and the Rothschilds family, friends of the show. Again, we've said this over and over again, but it's especially digging back into any fucking rich asshole from the Gilded Age or something, or the turn of the previous century. It's the same couple names just come up
over and over,
every single time. It's a small club, and we're not part of it.
Really quick,
go ahead,
if you were kind of done talking about Cecil Rhodes and we were going to move into the Oppenheimers, there maybe at some point we can do a full episode on Rhodes himself. I know he's come up.
I figured we'd talk about him a couple times.
But he just as a person, just so much concentrated evil and also weirdness to this kind of larger than life figure, and deeply tied to the sort of entire colonial history of the British Empire in Africa, and
responsible for genocide.
He at one point was the governor or whatever of the colony. Based out of South. I mean, presumably after he's made all of his money, and he if you've ever heard the term Rhodes Scholar, right, or Rhodes Scholarship, right, he founded that or set the provisions for that, and then it was founded right after he died. And part of the original idea there was that he had this very intense racialized vision of the world. I mean, big surprise. He was literally an evil colonizer. But he believed that, essentially Anglo-Saxons, and in particular blonde, blue-eyed young men were inherently destined for greatness and were meant to rule the world. And so the whole idea then of setting up the scholarship was to train, the next generation of world leaders or whatever. And there also apparently was and again, it's hard to find the exact information, it's so long ago. There may have been a sexual component to this, where he spent quite a lot of his time with very young, athletic, blonde, blue-eyed young men. So there's some deeply weird shit going on in fucking this early diamond magnate, evil racist piece of shit's mind. But anyway,
I mean, if just on the topic of him, I think like while I was doing my part of the research, I came across a quote from him, and I don't really know much about him, but the quote that I saw, which I think probably just encapsulates his like soul and who he was as a person, was he just bluntly said, "I prefer land to N-words," and he didn't say N-word. He said the actual word. He did not view them as people. There was like another quote that I read that said the native is to be treated as a child and denied franchise. Like he really just thought only white people are people.
Well, here's like on that same topic here, like if you I'm looking at his Wikipedia page right now, and like the very first paragraph under political views says Rhodes wanted to expand the British Empire because he believed that the Anglo-Saxon race was destined to greatness. In his last will and testament, so in his will, for whatever reason, he felt it necessary to write about the English. I contend that we are the first race in the world, and that the more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race. I contend that every acre added to our territory means the birth of more of the English race, who otherwise would not be brought into existence. I'm trying to imagine, like, why would you, even if you're like a weird, like lifelong racist, why are you putting this in your will? I don't understand this.
Well, again, that's what the Rhodes Scholarship thing is. It's like this idea of like legacy. It's like he had this really intense belief that this was the way forward. I think, again, I wonder where this connection shows up later, but he not only was particularly fond of Anglo-Saxons, but he also saw Germans.
He was very fond of the Germans,
as sort of a common kin, and he hoped that one day the Kaiser and the king could rule the entire world together.
Yeah, no, actually what I was just reading from goes on to say Rhodes wanted to develop a commonwealth in which all of the British-dominated countries in the empire would be represented in the British Parliament. Rhodes explicitly stipulated in his will that all races should be eligible for the scholarships. It is said that he wanted to develop an American elite of philosopher kings who would have the United States rejoin the British Empire.
Oh boy.
As Rhodes also respected and admired the Germans and their Kaiser, he allowed German students to be included in the Rhodes scholarships. He believed that eventually the United Kingdom, in parentheses here, including Ireland, the US and Germany would dominate the world and ensure perpetual peace.
Cool.
Some weird sort of foreshadowing here, his fondness for the German people specifically.
He also lent, not him personally, but the fucking the sort of northern part of the British empires at that time, kind of large colonial territory, which eventually later became its own state or whatever. It was called Rhodesia, named after him, right? Like, so this guy is again, maybe at a later date we can do a much more deeper dive into him and all his weird fucking proclivities and stuff.
He's a weird.
But this is the beginning of the diamond trade.
Right.
Like this is the guy who does it. The fucking weird, probably pedophilic British imperialist, racist, obsessed with delusions of grandeur and artificial scarcity when it comes to diamonds.
I gotta stop reading about this guy because like I'm just gonna keep talking about it. Apparently he was like really into like conspiracy theories. We just have to do like an episode about that.
Yeah. For another time. But anyway, please continue. Chris.
I wanted to say as well, and we might get into it later. I'm not totally sure what you guys have, but especially with like the German connection. So that's not the end of the German connections to De Beers, and in fact, there has been some accusations and some criticism against De Beers for their activities during World War II, namely denying the Allies the use of or sales of their diamonds for industrial uses, but providing them to Hitler. And if you Google this sort of thing, it's rather strange. I found like when you try to Google this, you find several articles refuting it. Specifically, like a couple of, I guess, like the New York Times and the Washington Post both did a handful of articles in the early '90s that like brought up the history of De Beers and during World War II and like their business relationships with the Nazis and at the same time, they're not doing business, like refusing to do business with the Allies and doing business with the Nazis instead. But like, I found a couple letters to the editor written to both. I thought it was strange that they had both been published. A letter to the editor of the New York Times and also the Washington Post, refuting the accusations that the De Beers company had, that the Oppenheimers had, done business in selling, diamonds for industrial uses to the Nazis. And I found it very strange that they both had these sort of, what I'm getting at here is that they both felt like they were written by like the PR department of the De Beers company. So yeah.
Interestingly, like I found the same thing when I was doing my research. I found a lot of articles. I even found one site that had like a timeline that included like accusations from an NGO and then the response from De Beers, like back to back, the back and forth between them. Like a lot of the articles that reference like the activities that they've engaged in that could be like called genocide, that a lot of people do believe is genocide, and the conflict diamond stuff, like they're very, very aggressive about countering that, and they're very aware of their image. And I think, and Shane, you might get into this, I think that is part of why they ended up divesting in the company eventually, because it did get to like a breaking point. I think
it feels like a Streisand effect type thing. Like when I'm when I'm Googling and what I'm trying to find is something about the ties between the De Beers and the Nazis, and all I can find is articles refuting the connection between De Beers and the Nazis. It feels...
my T-shirt that says my oppressive imperialist colonial diamond racist mining company had no connection to the Third Reich is raising more questions than
So I'm going to go back to reading a little bit more from this paper, this essay or whatever, this article I was reading from. It's going to go on to talk a little bit about the early years of De Beers, and then how Ernest Oppenheimer came to take control of the company. So it says, in the following 3 decades, a German immigrant named Ernest Oppenheimer established himself as a prominent figure in the South African diamond and gold industry. After some time as a diamond expert, he entered the gold business by creating the Anglo-American Corporation of South Africa, by the way, with funding from J.P. Morgan, of course, owning a dominant share of South Africa's gold mine. His greatest ambition, however, was to gain a place on the board of De Beers, the company he felt would provide him with the best opportunities to expand his knowledge and power in the diamond industry. Oppenheimer sensed that the structure of the syndicate would provide De Beers with insufficient power to control the distribution of diamonds in the long run. In particular, he was aware of the danger that the members of the syndicate might be tempted to break away in the expectation of greater quantities and prices. De Beers' board members, however, reviewed Oppenheimer as an overambitious nouveau riche and blocked his way into the board for decades. Not to be discouraged, Oppenheimer gradually bought blocks of De Beers shares whenever they came up for sale, until finally he was one of the 2 most significant single shareholders, the other being I don't know why this name made me laugh earlier, and it's making me laugh again. Solly Joel, Sollyggoel. That's his friend and business partner. At last, Oppenheimer gained full control and ownership of De Beers in 1926. Soon after, he was named chairman. An even larger company, the Diamond Corporation, was formed that had subsidiaries dealing with producing and selling diamonds all over the world. Outside contracts were practically made impossible by an exclusivity requirement that each supplier was forced to sign with the CSO, which is the Central Selling Organization. And this article is interesting because it's going to go a little bit into the way that De Beers, through this Central Selling Organization, establishes exclusive contracts with suppliers and buyers, and sort of in effect makes it impossible to deal with diamonds outside of De Beers. This is the way that De Beers is able to create this monopoly over the diamond industry. So this is, over time, new discoveries of diamond reserves in Australia, Siberia, and Western Africa became known and eroded the company's monopoly position in diamond supply. This is Ernest's son, Henry Oppenheimer, quickly realized the threat this implied and focused his efforts on maintaining power and distribution through the Central Selling Organization, the company's marketing arm. The structure of the De Beers conglomerate has remained widely unchanged ever since. A subsidiary of De Beers, this is outlining the way this whole cartel, this whole monopoly works. A subsidiary of De Beers buys diamonds from all producers, including De Beers' own mines, which represented about 1/2 of total supply. Each year, De Beers determines the total amount of diamonds it plans to sell in the market. Each producer is guaranteed a fixed percentage of total output. That is, De Beers commits to buy that amount and market it through the Central Selling Organization. Producers, in turn, are charged a handling and marketing fee ranging between 10 and 20%, depending on the amount purchased and the general demand situation. The Central Selling Organization serves as a clearinghouse for the entire industry. It regulates the quantity and price in the market. Packages of diamonds are bought and sold at sites held 10 times a year in London on a take-it-or-leave-it basis. As it remains a privilege to attend sites by the Central Selling Organization, few dealers dare to refuse a package offered to them. The attempt to haggle over quantity and price of the offered package could well lead to the site holder not being invited again. Over 80% of the world's diamonds were traded through the Central Selling Organization in its early days. Recent developments have caused a downward trend in this percentage. Present estimates range between 65 and 75%. The buyers from the Central Selling Organization are mainly diamond dealers who have the stones cut and polished and resell them at one of the world's main diamond clearing centers, Antwerp, New York, and Tel Aviv. And so I'm sure we'll get a little bit more into it in this episode, but this is the way in which Oppenheimer took over the country, in the way in which his son, who I believe, I'm not sure if his son is actually the one, but it was under him that the marketing phrase "diamond is forever" was originally came about, and the way that much of the business of the diamond industry throughout the 20th century has been keeping up this artificial scarcity and sort of driving up the price of diamonds, regardless of the fact that they're not rare. They're not really worth anything. They're not really worth anything. They don't really have sort of the intrinsic value of something else that might have a limited quantity, right? There's no scarcity in diamonds. There's a ton of this fucking shit they're pulling out of the earth every day. They're not rare. They used to be rare, and De Beers has done quite honestly an impressive job over the past 100 years or so of convincing people that the diamonds are still rare and do have this sort of intrinsic value. When they really don't. So I think, Carrie, you were going to talk perhaps a little bit more about the Oppenheimers themselves.
Yeah, I was going to get into the marketing, actually, the same thing that you mentioned about Henry, but I wanted to touch on, like you were mentioning, it's impossible to overstate the degree to which they've manipulated the diamond trade. Like when I was reading earlier, and I found it said they discovered diamonds in the USSR, so De Beers made a deal with the USSR to simply buy all their diamonds so that everything would continue going through a single channel through them. And then when other countries, I think it was Israel and Zaire, they decided not to work with De Beers and wanted to work outside of the single channel that they had created. So De Beers just released stockpiles of diamonds that they had that were similar to the diamonds from those countries, so that there would be no demand for those diamonds anymore. At every turn, they've just manipulated everything as much as possible to be completely in control of the diamond trade. So we kind of talked a little bit already about how they manipulated the supply of diamonds, right? But at the same time, around this time that Harry is becoming more involved in the business, they start to think about manipulating the demand for the diamonds. In the 30s, it really was not common at all in the United States to give a diamond engagement ring. It was just not something that was done. It wasn't, diamonds were not associated with romance in any way. So in the late 30s, the company, guided by Harry, sets out to try to change that. They want demand to increase. They need to come up with a way to sell more diamonds, basically. And at the same time, diamond prices are falling. So they need to also convince people that they need to spend a lot of money on these diamonds somehow, which as
in the middle of the Depression too.
Yeah, which as you said, there's no value. Like these are not worth anything.
Yeah,
right?
and I did just want to say I was really I was aware of the fact that diamonds don't have a whole lot of intrinsic value. That they're not really scarce anymore. But I knew that the De Beers company sort of operated as a monopoly and attempted to sort of fix the prices and create a sort of artificial scarcity for their product. But I'll tell you, I honestly did not know just to what degree they essentially sort of invented the whole idea of like a diamond engagement ring. I didn't know that. I didn't know that like wasn't like a thing. That was just
that's how successful they've been.
Yeah, that's a 20th century marketing invention.
Yeah, we just like completely take it for granted now. Like the average woman does expect a 2-month salary diamond engagement ring. That is just the expectation. And interesting, like something I noticed while I was doing my research, because I was trying to look up, there was something that I had seen a long time ago about a guy trying to trace the origins of a diamond. So I kept trying to like find that clip, and I never found it because everything is flooded with like making sure you get the right diamond for you. It's not just become a thing of like it's an expectation. Like people like plan around this for like months before they get their diamond. There's like specifications, like people are worried about color, clarity, all this stuff, and it is just like a totally accepted cultural phenomenon that was completely constructed by an ad agency.
Because I believe originally it was like in the 30s they did like a 1-month salary. Mm-hmm. Then later they changed it to like 2-month salary, and then I think even later they changed it to 3-month salary. Right? They just kept changing the marketing line of like this is what the expectation is. And a long time ago I saw something, either sort of like a TV doc or like maybe I heard it somewhere, but somebody was trying to illustrate like how bizarre that internalization that you're speaking to, where it's just like it's assumed it's part of cultural expectations. And it's like if you could imagine, I don't know, like 50 years from now that we all said like, oh yeah, pizza in the morning, pizza in the evening, pizza at supper time. That's something that we all have to do. That's just part of our culture. That's the expectation.
You're not having pizza in the morning, like
you can eat pizza.
You can eat it at any time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so but it is literally just a slogan that was created to generate this demand.
And it became so tied with it that like, and I'm not saying like this is like necessarily the fault of the people who feel like this, but it has become so tied to the idea of romantic love that there is a feeling of like if your partner, if you're a woman and you're in a heterosexual relationship, if your partner doesn't give you that, then maybe he doesn't love you. Maybe he's not a good partner for you. And this is all the result of a very, very concerted marketing campaign, decades long, to convince everybody that the logical conclusion of romantic love and like courtship is that you get a diamond. Like that's it.
The stat I read, I think from maybe it was BBC, it was something like prior to this campaign in the early 20th century, it was like less than 10% of engagement rings had diamonds. Right. And at the end of the 20th century, over 80% did.
That's insane. Yeah.
Well, there was I'm trying to actually find it right now. I don't know if I can find the exact statistics, but I read a similar sort of thing about because like in the mid to late 20th century, they also expanded this sort of marketing to Japan into other parts of the world, right? And so like in Japan, I'm trying to find exactly.
It went from like 6%.
Yeah,
I think,
here
to like,
it is. Yeah, it's even more stark. So this just started in Japan. Like this marketing reached Japan in the 1960s. And so this is the share of brides receiving diamond engagement rings in Japan, which was 6% in 1966, and by 1990 had reached 77%. And they did this not just in the United States and Japan, but also Germany and Brazil were other major places that they did this in as well, and also all around the world.
Yeah, and this is all the result of like it wasn't just like ads; it was like a very concerted campaign that they did. And I want to read a little bit from this article that I found in The Atlantic about their strategy. Movies at this point were like relatively new, and like movie stars had a lot of influence. So I'm going to start reading from the article. Movie idols, the paragons of romance for the mass audience, would be given diamonds to use as their symbols of indestructible love. In addition, the agency suggested offering stories and society photographs to selected magazines and newspapers, which would reinforce the link between diamonds and romance. Stories would stress the size of the diamonds the celebrities presented to their loved ones, and photographs would conspicuously show
and they still do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And they would conspicuously show the stone on the hand of a well-known woman. Fashion designers would talk on radio programs about the trend towards diamonds that Ayer planned to start. And Ayer is the ad agency. But this is the next part is the really fucked up part for me that I was like, this is insane. Then this is like 10 years after they started working with the ad agency. In its 1947 strategy plan, the advertising agency outlined a subtle program that included arranging for lecturers to visit high schools across the country. All of these lectures revolve around the diamond engagement ring and are reaching thousands of girls in their assemblies, classes, and informal meetings in our leading educational institutions. The agency explained.
Brought to you by Lucky Strike.
The agency explained in a memorandum to De Beers. The agency had organized in 1946 a weekly service called Hollywood Personalities, which provided 125 leading newspapers with descriptions of the diamonds worn by movie stars. In 1947, the agency commissioned a series of portraits of engaged socialites. The idea was to create prestigious role models for the poorer middle-class wage earners. The advertising agency explained in its 1948 strategy paper, "We spread the word of diamonds worn by stars of screen and stage, by wives and daughters of political leaders, by any woman who can make the grocer's wife and the mechanic's sweetheart say, 'I wish I had what she has.'" And it's around this time that a copywriter at N.W. Ayer comes up with the slogan that we all know, "A diamond is forever," which is also bullshit. Diamonds can be shattered, chipped, discolored. They can be destroyed many different ways. It's not forever.
I'm destroying some now.
I do it every day, and nobody can stop me. But, they really, really successfully sold this idea that, like, diamonds are indestructible, and if your love is indestructible, then you need to get a diamond for your sweetie. And this resulted in, over, I think it's a span of, like, 40 years from the late 30s to the late 70s. They went from $23 million in revenue in the United States to $2.1 billion, which is a huge jump. And they also, their advertising budget went from $200,000 a year to $10 million a year. And I mean, the really fucked up thing to me was that they went to high schools to like convince young girls of this. I mean, that's how it became such a part of our culture, right? Like for women in that generation, they just passed that on to their daughter as a matter of course. Like, this is just the way that it is. By the way, all the articles about this, a lot of them are from like advertising magazines, and they're all talking about how fucking awesome all of this is.
Yeah.
And when you read it just makes you want to die. Like, it's fucking
No, literally when the best, like, most sort of impartial, factual article I could find was the one from Business Insider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. Like I was reading an article that said, I think it was from Ad Age, like they awarded this like the best tagline of the century or whatever, because it really is like an incredible like campaign that they did. It was so successful. But at some point, and I can't find the date, I think it was in the 80s, like it starts to like kind of like die down a little bit. It wasn't that they were like selling less engagement rings necessarily. It was like they weren't selling as much as they wanted to, I guess. So they come up with the idea of a second diamond ring, like the anniversary one. Mm-hmm. And they start like pushing that.
Another one.
And there was a quote that I wanted to read and it got cut off in the thing that I printed, so let me find it really quick. Yeah, so they do the second diamond ring to celebrate the wedding anniversary when it seemed like the engagement ring market was kind of like petering out. And then they started like expanding their taglines, right? So here are some of their taglines. "Marry me" sounds so much better than just "Merry Christmas." And those, I mean, I grew up seeing ads around like Christmas showing like giving diamond rings or whatever.
Yeah.
And this is the one that I really liked. "Of course there's a return on your investment. We just can't print it here."
Ooh.
You get a diamond, and then you know what happens.
She better give it up. Yeah. Just really insidious stuff. And it's, even for people who are like aware of the influence of advertising and marketing, like it just has become such a cultural norm that like, even if you're aware of it, in many cases, you're like pressured to partake in it.
Because it ties to those, those feelings of, deep emotion and real feelings of affection and love and stuff, which is why I think that this campaign, I mean, again, it being lauded so much by other advertisers as like, whatever you were saying, like the slogan of the century, right?
Right.
It really breaches into that realm of like just sociological propaganda, right? Where it's like it's taught an entire new idea that is now part of the culture that's outside of, I mean, even the idea of like diamond is forever, right? Like prior to really like, thinking about this in a concentrated way for this show, like I know I'd heard that slogan, but I couldn't place it necessarily, right? There's a fucking
literally a Bond movie.
Yeah. That's just named that. Yeah.
And not just, it was also just like tying it to your sense of self-worth as a man, right? And you had mentioned, Shane, that they changed, like they upped the salary requirement. And there was one article that I was reading that was like the salary requirement was like such a stroke of genius. Again, somebody like praising it or whatever. And it did start out as like 1 month in the United States. And then interestingly, when they did their campaign in the UK, and this is this person saying this, they wanted to entwine Western values with what they call the Japanese sense of honor. And so in Japan, they immediately went for 3 months. Like an ad literally just said a diamond engagement ring worth 3 months' salary. That's an ad from the 70s in Japan. So it's just like they knew exactly what they were doing and it was incredibly successful. And it's like it's also like so brazen, right? Like you think to yourself, if you see an ad,
especially that.
Yeah, like if you see an ad saying that, you think to yourself, like, I'm not going to fall for that or whatever. But, like going back to the United States angle, if you're a guy growing up in the United States in the 40s or 50s, maybe you see the ads and you're like, that's bullshit. But your girlfriend, your sweetheart has, since she was in high school, had people coming to her fucking school to tell her if your boyfriend loves you, he'll get you a diamond. You're going to get the diamond. Like,
well, especially what you were just mentioning as well about like, when they went to market the same thing in Japan, sort of like to like base it on like Japanese cultural values or whatever to be like, hey, we can get a little bit more money out of these ones, something like that, right? So
right.
Make the decision that you could get a little bit more money out of them than you could out of an American.
Yeah, and I mean, I think also, and I want to find like, I think there's like a word for it. Even after they, saw that the engagement ring stuff was like kind of winding down and they came up with the anniversary ring idea, I have seen, and I think there might be a name for it, getting a diamond ring for like your wife when she's pregnant. Like they want to tie this to like every major life event that has anything to do with romantic love, which is like so fucking evil.
Diamond in the morning, diamond in the evening, diamond at supper time.
Yes. And they just built such a powerful narrative. Like there was no need, one of the articles I was reading, I don't have the quote in front of me, but they were saying like what was so genius about this was like there didn't need to be like a brand. Like this wasn't like a sales tactic. Like a salesman didn't need to convince anybody in a store that they needed to buy this diamond because people would rush to the stores to buy them. There was no need for a brand name or brand recognition. It was just, I need a diamond. Like this is a cultural norm that I need to adhere to. And because De Beers controlled the market, they controlled the diamond trade completely, it just all went to them. So, in addition to all this marketing stuff, where are these diamonds actually coming from, right? And as we approach like the end of the century, there starts to be more concern about that and more questions around it because people start bringing attention to, there was an NGO called Global Witness that started bringing attention to blood diamonds or conflict diamonds. There's a couple of other names for it, hot diamonds, red diamonds, but usually people say blood diamonds or conflict diamonds. And I thought when I first heard this term, blood diamond, that it referred to any diamond that's mined in a situation that's, there's like some kind of human rights violation involved somehow. Like maybe the mine is operating in a way that's violating human rights, something like that. But the definition of it is actually pretty narrow. It's referring to diamonds that are mined in a war zone and then sold to finance an insurgency. And this is going to be important when we talk about how De Beers addresses this. It needs to be financing an insurgency, an invading army's war efforts, or a warlord's activity. So as attention starts being brought to this, De Beers needs to figure out how to react, right? And like we were saying, they're very, very conscious of their image. They're very conscious of like putting out PR against anything negative that's said about them. So what do? There's a few steps that lead to this, but they end up coming up with their own process to certify that their diamonds are conflict free. It's not technically
I trust them.
just.
I trust them.
It's it's in November 2002. There's a lot of negotiations happening, and it's happening between governments, and it's happening between other players in the diamond industry. But De Beers is really the one driving this, and that's what leads to the creation of the Kimberley Process Certification Scheme. And it sets out requirements for controlling rough diamond production and trade, and that became effective in 2003, right? So according to De Beers, at this point, suddenly, overnight, all of their diamonds are conflict-free. They're certified, so they have to be, right? I trust them, and that's it. That's the end of the story. The diamonds are conflict-free now, guys. Yep. It's over.
Oh, great. Okay.
The listener can't see it, but I'm like, just casually sort of dusting my hands off as if I was in a cartoon or something. Nothing to see here, folks.
So, this did help restore the reputation of the industry after people became aware of blood diamonds. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, there is a lot of information out there now for, conscientious shoppers about making sure that your diamonds are conflict free. And what they really needed was to put a layer between them and the diamonds to say, these diamonds are fine. You don't have to feel bad about the diamond. You can keep thinking that the diamond is just a symbol of your indestructible love. Don't worry about the people who died in the direct vicinity of where the diamond came from. That does not matter.
Fair trade diamonds.
Yeah, fair trade diamonds.
Small batch, bespoke,
artisanal.
So what ends up happening really is that they're not actually conflict free, right? There's a bunch of loopholes. The diamonds are kind of going through different places after they're mined and going through tax havens. And there's just this weird legal and financial structure around it that's being used to just manipulate the diamond trade even further without even, they call them clean diamonds, without actually producing clean diamonds, but saying that they're clean diamonds, right? And they're not. They're coming from either conflict zones or places that have other human rights abuses that we'll probably get into a little bit later. Even while this process is in place, they're still continuing to engage in extremely shady practices. So in 2013, there was an investigation that concluded that $3 billion in diamond revenues were used to rig Zimbabwean elections, for example. And then little by little, in the late aughts, people start to be I don't want to be part of this anymore. People who were founding members of the Kimberley process start resigning. One man, his name is Ian Smiley of the Canadian-based NGO Partnership Africa Canada. He resigns and he says that they've failed to regulate anything and he can no longer contribute to the pretense that failure is success. He's basically saying it's all a farce. Shortly after that, another founding member quit. He was from the UK-based NGO Global Witness, or actually I think it's Global Witness completely disentangles itself. And they say, despite having all tools in place, the scheme was failing to effectively address issues of noncompliance, smuggling, money laundering, and human rights abuses in the world's diamond fields. The scheme came under further criticism from Global Witness and Partnership Africa Canada in June 2010, after the Kimberley Monitor, appointed to review diamond mining conditions in Zimbabwe, recommended that the country be allowed to sell diamonds as conflict-free from its contested Marange diamond fields in Chiadzwa. For the first time, the two NGOs jointly called for a redefined classification for conflict diamonds. So again, because I was saying, that definition is so narrow, there can even be a conflict in a certain zone where the diamonds are coming from. But in the scope of the Kimberley process that's used to certify them as conflict-free, they're not considered to be conflict diamonds. So, they just set up this way to police themselves and give the impression of creating conflict-free diamonds and having the supply of conflict-free diamonds when they didn't really have it. It's a bloody business. It's riddled with human rights abuses, even apart from just operating in conflict zones. And they needed a way to address it from a marketing perspective. And this was a huge part of the way that they did that. I think at this point, the Kimberley process is pretty much abandoned. But I think, just from what I know, and maybe this is an assumption, but I do think that it was really successful because I know people that are liberals or progressives, and they're no, I make sure that my diamonds are conflict free.
Right.
And when you look at ads for diamonds and stuff, there's a big emphasis on that, certified conflict free, don't even worry about it. And
maybe I pay a little bit more.
Maybe I pay a little bit extra to feel good about the diamond that I'm buying to feel really good about it. Not only does my boyfriend loves me, he cares about human rights, you know? Like, this is an ethical diamond on my finger, and it'll be there forever. Dudes rock.
That's what I call the diamond. Did you want to talk a little bit maybe also about the situation in Botswana?
We went to a park in Botswana.
You know, there's no way in like a podcast that goes an hour and a half to 2.5 hours to like get into all the various human rights abuses that this company has been engaged in. You know, I have in my notes here stuff about so many different things. Like there's Kimberley process officials that were supposedly inspecting mines claiming that they were unaware of tortures and killings that were later exposed in a documentary. You know, they basically they completely knowingly engage in human rights abuses. And they also, at the same time, just in a completely underhanded way, cover it up. And they feel no remorse about this, obviously. It's just a whole structure that they've set up to do this. And so Shane, like you just mentioned, the Botswana thing that I mentioned to you earlier is there is a tribe, the San tribe in Botswana, that they started to be forcibly relocated and threatened with forcible relocation since the 80s. Coincidentally, around the same time that diamond resources were discovered on the land that they inhabit.
What a coincidence.
Why? What? How could this happen? So there was like a pretty, and I think I mentioned earlier, I think that this is when I heard about it, because there were like a couple of celebrities involved in like trying to bring attention to this. And I think in part it was because they had been, especially Iman, the model, she had been like doing advertising for De Beers, and she probably did not want to be like associated with genocide. There was attention brought to this back then, and that's like when I heard about it. And they were basically just working with the government. And this is a tribe that was already like in a precarious position, and kind of the way that one article that I read put it was that they were like, you know, they were already like at the bottom of the food chain there, basically, right? Like they were already being subjected to other abuses. They were already, you know, having their rights kind of disregarded by the government. And this NGO, Survival International, kind of started a campaign to try to bring attention to the fact that they were trying to relocate these people from their home. And the government tried to frame this as, you know, there's so many of them and we need to like start educating their children. We don't have the resources to educate them on their own land. We need to, you know, move them somewhere where they have like the resources that they need. This is for their own good. You know, according to Survival International, they carried out a concerted campaign to clear 2,000 of them off an area of land roughly the size of Denmark so that diamonds could be mined there. The diamonds would be mined by Debswana, which is a 50-50 joint venture with De Beers. So again, it's just De Beers controls all the fucking diamond mining. Of course, it's them doing it, right? And the interesting thing here, going back to what we were talking about earlier, Chris, how there's like that back and forth, like I found like a couple of the websites that talk about this, and there aren't really that many. Interestingly, like some of the links are just dead when you click on them. But there are so many websites that have like the back and forth between Survival International and De Beers, like, you know, basically giving De Beers an opportunity to say this group are like liars.
Well, one side says one thing and another side says another thing. Who knows?
We just have to ask questions or whatever. And another UK NGO, kind of like Global Witness, which I mentioned earlier, they kind of grudgingly acknowledge that De Beers deals only in clean diamonds. And that's because at this point that Kimberley process is in place and they're involved in that Kimberley process. Still at this point, they haven't disentangled themselves yet. So during this time where everybody's talking about the genocide, they're like, you know, actually De Beers does like clean diamonds or whatever. It's totally fine. But it's possible that there's institutional racism by the government that's making this happen. So they were kind of like acting as like a shield for De Beers, which is like really fucked up when you consider that their role is supposed to be like protecting these people ostensibly, right? And, you know, I'm sure that there are many other organizations like this that were involved in the Kimberley process that provided that cover, which is why eventually they had to like disentangle themselves from the Kimberley process when it became obvious that it was just like a way for this company to salvage their reputation while continuing to like do genocide, mine diamonds in conflict areas, commit horrible human rights abuses in their mines. And I mean, the main article that I read about this is so like, it's so both sides. It's almost like, news agencies are afraid to be like, De Beers is doing genocide, which is what they were doing. Like, it is fair to call forcible relocation of thousands of people, especially like removing their children and educating them in a different way. Or like that is genocide. That's just what it is.
For the purposes of resource extraction.
For the purposes of resource extraction, yeah.
Yes.
So before that resettlement happened in that area, there were 2,000 people from that tribe there. Now there are about 30 at the time that this article was written. Man. So, I mean, like, they successfully did this, right? And then eventually De Beers sold that mine in Botswana to Gem Diamonds. And this is something that, comes up over and over. Like, they take as much as they feel like they can from a certain area or a certain thing, and then they just kind of like divest from it. And this is probably why eventually they also like divested from the company completely and sold off their share, as it became obvious that, the social tide was changing when it comes to this in some way. Like, people are more aware now of these human rights abuses that they perpetrate and of like their marketing and all that stuff. And it probably just became a thing of like, this is not a good place for us to be anymore. We want to be billionaires, but we also want to look good. And I know, Shane, you were going to get into their divesting and more recent activities.
Yeah. And before I do, I should also note that currently the government of Botswana has a stake in De Beers.
Right.
They have an ownership stake, which, again, what a coincidence.
Ah.
So, in looking at the sort of recent activities of the Oppenheimer family, a little bit more fill-in history to the stuff that we've already talked about, right? So, the original guy, right, was this guy, Ernest Oppenheimer. Ernest, okay. Yeah.
Ernest goes to the diamond mine.
And then his son, Harry Oppenheimer, right, sort of spearheaded the company and did all of the, it was in charge during all those kind of like big marketing changes during the 20th century. And then his son, Nicky Oppenheimer, and I really hate this, that like everywhere you look for this guy, he's always called Nicky. Of course, his name is Nicholas. He's called like Nicky.
Yeah, little
right?
Nicky.
And Nicky is like primo boomer age. He was born June 8th, 1945. It's like, it's almost to the T, like the perfect baby boomer generation. So what I'm getting at is Harry dies in 2000. All these guys also lived insane lifespans.
Of course.
Harry dies in 2000. He's 91. But Nicky's still around. Again, born in the 40s, and in the 60s, he gets involved in the company with his dad, and helps spearhead a number of those expansions of the marketing campaigns into international spaces that we were talking about. And then in turn, he has a son, Jonathan Oppenheimer, who then also was like very involved in the company and stuff. He was born in the late 60s, so now he's 51. So what I'm getting at here is that, there's this lineage, there's this like multi-generational thing, and often in a lot of the articles that I've read about Jonathan Oppenheimer, they always call him like the fourth generation, right? Mm-hmm. Now, in that period that we were just discussing of like the 90s into the 2000s, right? This is when there is this much larger international focus on the diamond trade. And there are all these problems that come up with the obvious various abuses and things going on in there. And this is when, these successive generations of Oppenheimers at the head of the De Beers company are trying to do some kind of like, PR defense. And part of that is in the early 2000s, Nicky Oppenheimer, who at this point is like the chairman or CEO of De Beers, he comes up with this paper in 2003 called the Brenthurst Initiative. And this is essentially like a long-form policy proposal corporate white paper thing that honestly he probably didn't even fucking write, right? Mm-hmm. But, his company put out and has his name on it, which is like about developing South Africa. Because obviously, as well as we know, in the 90s, right, there's the end of apartheid in South Africa, there's that big changeover, and there's questions, especially among the like white, rich, industrialist, colonialist, racist elite who have made so much money out of South Africa, and the Oppenheimers are part of that. Like, where do we go from here, right? And so this policy proposal paper thing that he comes up with, it's hemmed in by all of the kind of corporate multicultural speak that you could imagine, right? Again, from a PR defensive thing. But the basic gist of it is the way to develop South Africa's economy and bring us into the 21st century, etc., is to create tax incentives for corporations. Now, given the context of this, they do seem to be tied in this initial policy proposal to like sort of evaluating companies and like whether or not they're sticking to the end of apartheid, which is a very like a legalese way of saying like sort of evaluate whether or not the company is outwardly racist. And if they're not outwardly racist, give them a huge tax break. And there's a number of things listed here, but the main one, again, is lowering the corporate tax rate in South Africa.
Did they develop a process to determine if they were racist or not?
There is actually a point system.
Oh my God,
for
dude.
Relative racism.
Yeah, means testing. Yeah. Means
But,
testing racism.
Yeah, and again, it's through all these kind of different corporate legalese speak. So it's not very interesting, so I won't get into it. But so the Ben-Hur Initiative, this policy paper, this comes out in 2003 and put out by the Oppenheimer family, Nicky, who's the patriarch, and then Jonathan, who's his son. They have their hands in this. The following year, in 2004, they set up the Brent Hurst Foundation, which is a think tank. It's called a nonpartisan think tank to develop ideas and policy proposals and papers and what have you in partnership with governments and private businesses to, stimulate development and growth in South Africa. Like that's the headline of this. And of course, this is a foundation or whatever that is set up in the beginning of the Oppenheimers, again, specifically Nicky, thinking maybe like it's time to move out of the kind of more like business end of this and to realize like, hey, we're billionaires now. We can rest on our laurels and all the evil wealth that our like horrible forefathers have accumulated for us and go into like philanthropy. And I'm going to get back to the Brent Hurst Foundation because there's some, would you believe it, some interesting proposals that they have for how to meet the challenges of the 21st century. But this is the beginning of that. In the early 2000s, and it's almost certainly carried the way that you were saying, right? It lines up totally with the timeline of, like, this is when there's more of a focus on the industry, and there's a lot of negative press about it, right? And certainly I could imagine at the various cocktail parties that these guys were at, it's maybe a little uncouth. And it should be mentioned, too, that I know for sure Nicky was, even though, again, the family is based out of South Africa, was mostly raised and came of age in the UK. And then the same thing happened for his son, Jonathan. Right, like it's a classic kind of like colonial maneuver, right? Then you send your kids back to the mother country or whatever to get education. I think they both went to like Oxford or whatever, to be in those circles. So you can imagine at the British 2000s rich 1% cocktail parties that they're all at, they might be getting the stink eye because they're involved in, that awful business of the diamond trade. Right. So this is when they're starting to get out of it. And eventually they do make that move. And it's in 2011 where they finalize this deal to basically get out. And at this point, too, it's also worth mentioning that, Chris, when you were talking about Ernest Oppenheimer at the beginning, he formed initially this other company, which is Anglo-American Corporation, right? And then he bought up the shares of De Beers. And so the two companies were kind of wrapped up into each other, but they're technically, separate entities. It's, again, this like weird corporate hydra thing that we've talked about a couple of times. So while De Beers maintained its focus on diamonds, Anglo-American became this much broader, like, mining company. And there was always a sort of tangled relationship between the two. Again, all of the Oppenheimers usually kind of worked between the two. I think Nicky at one point was the chair of Anglo-American, then he was the chair of De Beers. And for what it's worth, in 2020, just to give you a sense of like the size of these companies, Anglo-American, his revenue was like $30 billion, Jesus right? Christ. And they mine not just diamonds, but every conceivable thing you could imagine mining. They're the world's largest producer of platinum, but they also copper, nickel, iron, coal, all kinds of other stuff. But the Oppenheimer family is more now part of De Beers. And so in 2011 is when they make this move to be like, all right, we're going to totally divest. We're going to get out of it. And we're going to basically sell all of our family shares in De Beers to Anglo-American. So they do that in 2011, and I believe the price tag that they had for their shares was $5.1 billion. Now, of course, their personal wealth was already in the little billions. And so the estimates for what their family's wealth was after that sale and to today, it kind of oscillates depending on where you're looking for the source. It's really hard to find like very specific biographical information about some of the members of this family, but it's somewhere between like $6 and $12 billion. Is what I got from looking at it. So in 2011, they sell this off, and Nikki now is, again, through the kind of initiative of the Brent Hearst Foundation, but as well as like being a sort of public speaker, right? Like he continues this weird in-between like talking and policy circuit where he's still like hanging out with all the same people and coming up with various ideas and policy proposals or whatever. Jonathan, interestingly, who's now like the other heir son, and he is, what did I say? He's like in his 50s. What do you do when you have all the money in the world and you could do whatever you want and you were in charge of the big diamond company? He bought a giant estate. I was trying to find the price tag for it, but I couldn't get it. But he bought this giant estate in the UK called Waltham Place. Ugh. And it's in a township, interestingly enough, called White Waltham, and it is a huge fucking mansion, and I'm going to send you guys a picture of it just so you get a sense. But this is literally like a centuries old estate of the British nobility. At one point, it was called Windsor Place because early in like the 1500s or the 1600s or something, the Windsor family had built the initial grounds or whatever the fuck. But anyway, he lives there now, right? In addition to owning some large, obscene estate in South Africa. And from what I can tell, and I'm gonna drop this in the Discord, and you can kind of look at it to your discretion.
Waltham Place.
It's like a organic farm. What? That's how it's put out. It's like we're an organic farm interested in the promotion of biodiversity, and so they grow a bunch of shit on the territory, and they have livestock and stuff, and then they do like tours and they do classes as well, where you can like go and learn about how to do like sustainable farming practices or whatever, and it's all wrapped up again in this sort of environmentalist language, and and they do whatever those kinds of deals that one does with like local schools and stuff to like bring kids out there and to look at the thing. Right. Of course, it's shut down now during COVID, but I was trying to see if we could do a tour. And they have a shop. They sell the crops they come out with. And of course, Jonathan is in his commitment to the sustainable farming thing. He's actually out there planting and picking the crops, right?
Of course.
Obviously not. But
what?
In any case, if you and I recommend the listener, if this is of interest to you, if this is starting to pique your anger, like go to this website. It's just walthamplace.com and just kind of like click around, and it's just it's just so full of bullshit that it's so astounding. But this is what you can do if if you have all the money in the world, you can buy this giant mansion, convert it into some kind of semi bullshit, environmental friendly farm.
They have a friar's walk.
There you go.
Yeah. And a Japanese garden.
Wait, he wrote a book about it.
What? And there's all these like pictures on the website of like kids hands out like holding seeds or like holding like a little bird, and it's all in this language of sustainability and the impact and thinking about our future, what have you. Interestingly too, in terms of thinking about then what the next generation of this family is going to be like, I looked into it, and Jonathan was married to a woman named Jennifer Ward, who I believe he met in the United States, and then she passed away a few years ago, but prior to that they had 3 kids. Samuel, Isabel, and Nathaniel, who based on, and again, it was super hard trying to figure this out because I was so interested in, like, now what are these heirs and heiresses doing? Right? Like, they have all the money in the world. They don't have to work. They don't have to even be a part of the company anymore. What are they doing? And even just finding out the basic information, and I had to, like, reverse engineer this based on, like, way older articles about Jonathan and his wife or whatever, but the kids are in their, like, mid-20s now, or they're maybe late teens. And so, you know, presumably they either live in this estate or they have, you know, one of 50 apartments around the world or wherever where they're living in. I was trying to figure out what any of them are up to. I couldn't get that out. But interestingly, right, in terms of, like, looking at this sort of obscene palace of, like, you know, the British monarchy that they were able to essentially buy their way into, and this focus on sustainability, right? It almost seems to ring a little bit hollow, considering that the family's obscene wealth is taken from resource extraction, right?
Right.
And so this gets me back to talking about this philanthropic turn, and this turn also to kind of like politics and like policy initiatives, and the company, you know, there's a lot of, I mean, the family now, but the company at the time, whatever, 20 years ago, it made this turn into talking quite a bit about sustainability and growth and development, what have you. Most recently, last year, there was like some big PR thing where Nikki Oppenheimer was like, we're going to give a bunch of money to South Africa for COVID, and we're going to put it in like a trust so that they can help small businesses develop and survive this, you know, this thing. And it's something very familiar to the Eat the Rich cinematic universe, right? Which is the turn to philanthropy as a means to, like, cover up your sins, right? Or as a way to adjust your legacy. But again, specifically thinking in terms of sustainability and what have you. So like I said, in the early 2000s, there's first this, the Brent Hearst initiative, and then it turns into this foundation. And this is when Nikki and the rest of the family start getting more involved in kind of being like publicly facing, right? Like talking a little bit openly about their company. And they start writing papers, and they try to get into like academic places, policy-oriented places, what have you. And so I want to read this one piece by Nikki Oppenheimer. And again, that's the signed name. Who knows who really wrote it? But it has a signed name that was published in the World Policy Institute in 2008. World Policy Institute, of course, is another nonpartisan, you know, like forward-thinking growth initiative, development, technology, etc. kind of place. So most of this paper is like, you know, how do we develop South Africa? How do we encourage developing nations to grow? Blah, blah, blah. A lot of, again, legalese and bullshit. I want to skip to the middle of this paper and read from this. This is under the subheading, The Diamond Dilemma. So again, this is Nikki Oppenheimer writing in 2008. We in the diamond industry do have one big advantage over the other extractive industries, our product. Gem diamonds have no practical use. You can't eat them, use them to build a shelter, or run your car, and yet demand for them generates a multi-billion-dollar worldwide industry. In 2006, rough diamond production was worth $12.5 billion, while the cutting centers produced nearly $19 billion of polished stones, all to feed a $70 billion worldwide demand for diamond jewelry. With new markets emerging, the demand for diamonds is expected to continue to grow during the next 25 years. Now here's the part that is interesting, and I think, Carrie, you might find a connection to what you were talking about. The very nature of the gem diamond is essentially symbolic as opposed to practical value, makes it extremely vulnerable to reputational risk, and all of us in the diamond business know this well. So when in the late 1990s we were alerted by Global Witness to the fact that diamonds in Sierra Leone were being used to fund one of Africa's most brutal civil wars, we had to act. Despite the fact that less than 4% of the world diamond production was ever involved in funding Africa's wars, we decided firstly to suspend all our outside buying operations in Africa because we could not be 100% sure of provenance. So that's the statistic that they came up with. It's only 4%, right? And again, that's probably based on that narrow definition that you were talking about. Continue. Acting on the principle that one diamond used to fund conflict was one diamond too many, the whole diamond industry responded to the challenge. The result, in a remarkably short time, was an independently audited system of warranties which follow a given diamond through the pipeline from manufacturer to retailer and consumer, guaranteeing that it has not been involved in funding conflict in compliance with UN resolutions. And then goes into a long explanation of the Kimberley process, blah, blah, blah. But, like, what's going on here, right, is they're taking that entire scenario that you just outlined previously, and they're using it as a way to not only shore up, like, their own reputation or what have you, but to say essentially the diamond mining industry is a model from which we can learn in order to develop South Africa, but also the rest of the developing world, right? That's the, like, weird fucking economist pivot that starts to being made, right?
Yeah.
And so, in terms of then, thinking about this changeover and this move towards this kind of weird, like, political policy stuff, right? You have this thing that I mentioned with the Brenthurst Foundation. Now, I looked a little bit into this. There's probably just, like, a deep and evil history that I'm missing from, like, a lot of the connections. But if you go to the site and you kind of dig around, what you'll find is essentially that the Brenthurst Foundation, most of its, like, outward-facing stuff just seems like a generic hyper-capitalist liberal think tank, right? It's a lot of, like, we need to invest in jobs in order to secure the line go up. It's a lot of that kind of insanity.
Right.
Now, interestingly, the head of the Brenthurst Foundation now is this guy named Greg Mills. And when I started looking into this guy, it really piqued my interest, because this is, this is them, like, appointed. And, of course, like, the board of the foundation has all the various Oppenheimers on it, and a bunch of other people that were connected to their company and the industry. But this guy, Greg Mills, sort of comes out of, like, left field. He is... I'm almost certain he's some kind of, like evil Nazi spy,
right?
Like that in my reading of his life, very briefly. But, like, he was, like, at, like, NATO school and through the 90s and then, like, the early 2000s, he was, like, involved in all these, like, various kind of, like, shady NATO projects. In 2006, he was the special advisor to the commander of NATO forces in Afghanistan. And he did, like, intelligence operations, and he got, like, a bunch of medals as a result of this. So anyway, when I'm looking to put somebody in charge of my think tank, nonprofit, nonpartisan policy initiative, I'm going to go with, like, the fucking weird, shady secret ops guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, so he's now, like, the head, and most of the, like, kind of, like, public-facing articles you can find from there are written by him or have his name on it. Mm-hmm. And so this is, like, the big, again, thinking in terms of philanthropy, right? This is the big project that the Oppenheimers have dumped their money into now that they've divested from De Beers, right? So just put yourself in those shoes, right? You have more money than God. And you can do whatever you want. And your goal is to, like, let me, like, make my legacy a little better, right? Like let me try to, like, do something positive for the world. So I'm going to set up a foundation that's going to create blah, 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 bullshit, whatever. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to get the shady NATO spy guy, and I'm going to put him in charge of it. And would you believe it or not, what do you think the kind of intellectual output and policy proposal stuff from the Brenthurst Foundation is? And to give you an idea of what that might look like, I'm going to read a few headlines from recent articles and things they've put out.
Please do.
So this is one by Greg Mills. This is from October 2019. The title is From Liberation to Authoritarianism? From Russia to Africa with Love. And the article is essentially a sort of warning scare piece that, like, Vladimir Putin is trying to get involved in Africa, and that's not very good. Okay, let's go down the list here. This is this is the second in a two-part series. It's also written by Greg Mills. This is from this year, February 2021. Afghanistan Part 2, the Saudi Arabia of lithium. And then the subtitle here is the second in a 3-part series on the writer's trip to Afghanistan. This article looks at how the mining sector could help turn the country around. In it, there are policy lessons for donors and governments in Africa. And then it's just an outline of how the diamond mining industry's, model could be applied to Afghanistan in a positive way. Here's a good one from 2018. It's written by Greg Mills and another guy, Lyle White. Venezuela's populist Armageddon. Venezuela is a perfect populist example of what African countries, and especially South Africa, must avoid at all costs. And, it's a rundown of how, left-wing economics ruins countries and people in Venezuela,
of course.
All the classic right-wing tropes, yeah. There's actually a surprising amount of articles about Venezuela put out by this organization. I wonder why that is. There's a lot of articles also that use the headline populism that have come out in the last few years, and they're almost all about Venezuela, and it's clearly a way to sort of capitalize on this like political buzzword and use it as a cudgel to beat the left. But these are some of the more inflammatory ones. Most of the headlines and articles are quite boring, but the general picture is that this falls in line with like classic neoliberal, neocolonial economics, right? It's like lower corporate tax rates, expand the mining sector's ability to get into different places, and God forbid, don't even try to do anything like government or socialistly backed, right? Like that's what the majority of the output of this is, and why I think that's particularly interesting, again, in relationship to this fucking the other son, Jonathan, having this stupid fucking biodiversity organic farm in the middle of bumfuck England, is that like all of the proposals here that are outlined, right? They all talk about sustainability and the environment and looking ahead. There's quite a few articles here too that like blame China for climate change. Surprise, surprise. But simultaneous to that, right? Like even the piece that I was reading from before, the Diamonds Development and Democracy piece by Nikki Oppenheimer from 2008 keeps talking about like, sustainable growth through the extraction of resources. And while diamond mining in particular might not be the absolute worst culprit when it comes to like climate change or the environment, right? Like when you take into account that it's folded into a company, again, Anglo-American corporation that does mining across a whole wide variety of fields, right? Like these are intensely fucked up, not only in terms of labor, but also in terms of the environment practices, right? Like, I mean, you're talking about like strip mining whole fucking areas, or like, Chris, what you were even describing, like digging these giant quarries and then like sucking water out of them. And the idea that like, well, if we add technology and innovation, a lot of them haven't fucking changed in fucking, 100 years or whatever. It's the same practices. And it's just about like, cutting fucking down forests, pushing indigenous people off their land by force, and then just stripping the earth of its bare fucking resources, but couched in the language of, well, sustainability, growth, and God forbid, don't do socialism, because that would really put a wrench in all of this.
Do you want to eat rats? Do you want to eat rats like they do in Venezuela?
Exactly. And again, the absurdity of it, too, and this is why it was so bizarre to me, is like, you have all the money in the world, you could just do the bullshit you could just do the I'm gonna buy a farm,
right,
and like have tours of kids come in, and I could be like, hello everybody, we're raising radishes. I'm not personally, but me mates are, or whatever. You could just do that forever, like literally till the end of time. You have enough money to just do that. But instead, it has to always be coupled with, but at the same time, we really got to develop new regions. We got to extract new resources.
I wonder what his investments are in.
Well, that's a little gauche, don't you think? To ask what the Oppenheimers family's investments in. They already divested from diamonds.
What more do you want?
Exactly. So anyway, the conclusion for me here is like going, after going through the entire family's history and thinking about it, is just like this pathetic attempt to try to put lipstick on a pig, right? Like to be like, we're actually good now. It's disgusting. It really is fucking disgusting.
Yeah.
The fact that they got the NATO guy in there, and then of course all of his articles are like, we gotta watch out for Russia, and then also we should like bring the diamond mining industry to Afghanistan. It's just like, mwah. it's just the icing on the cake, right?
Yeah.
It is just like, well, this is the logical extension of the colonial wars.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we need to bring the same practices there.
Got to keep it moving.
Cecil Rhodes would be proud.
Oh, I don't want to know what he would say today.
He'd be on Substack.
He'd be just asking questions on Twitter.
Yeah.
So anyway, and again, to think about like the fact that these are people that are all part of this club, as you put it, Chris, that you're just not a part of, right? Like, in that Reuters piece from 2011 about them divesting, right? There's a quote from Nikki Oppenheimer, and I'll just read a little bit at the end of this article here. It says, quote, Nikki Oppenheimer told South Africa's Mining Weekly trade publication last month that relaxing is his hobby. And when asked what his personal best achievement was, he replied, quote, choosing my parents very well.
Yeah, well, it's easy for him to relax because he just never worked a day in his life. Yeah.
Yes.
But he's just like so obviously like aware. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. He's not even embarrassed about it at all.
Why would he be? Yeah.
Why would he be?
It's funny that I was literally, as I was like reading about the Oppenheimers and like as I was reading stuff for this episode, I literally like imagined, I was like, they probably have some fucking like shithead great grandson of this family who's probably like in fucking Monte Carlo or something right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
just being a shithead. Yeah.
Well,
I'm glad that you actually have brought them into this as well.
I was able to find some of the kids that you said you weren't, the three kids. Mm-hmm. One of them, his Facebook is under a different name than Oppenheimer. He changed it.
There you go.
So he might be, and another one is dating, I think, a South African celebrity, or was dating.
Yeah. I saw some of that too.
They seem like they have pretty nice lives from their Facebook profiles.
Right, exactly. there was one line too in one of the articles I was reading about the COVID money or whatever that they gave, mm-hmm. which again is, and I talked mostly about the Brent Hearst Foundation or whatever, but like, they've given money to various like arts programs and schools and stuff, all of this attempt to whitewash it. But in that one article about like the COVID money that they set aside, mm-hmm. Nikki Oppenheimer said like, and asked like, why did you do this? He was like, well, my grandson Samuel had mentioned, that we end up being pretty privileged South Africans at the end of the day, and that really made me think. And I just imagined this like 24-year-old kid who like grew up in that family being like, Granddad, we have all the money in the world, and I'm sure he's still like a shithead or whatever. But like, having that like weird kind of minor rebellious moment as being the scion of this like fucking evil diamond company, and the grandfather being like, yeah, you know what, we do have a lot of money. I'll throw some pennies for COVID relief.
For South Africans, we really turned out all right.
And the other interesting thing too, and this is a broader point that comes across a lot when you look at like the wealthy elite of South Africa, which is largely white, right? We're talking about this like colonial history,
right.
Like in all of the papers and shit. And I read a lot of them, and I didn't even want to read them on the show, mostly because they're boring and it's just like the same bullshit corporate speak over and over and over again. But in all of them, like in Nikki Oppenheimer's writing or when Jonathan Oppenheimer's writing, they always call themselves like Africans. They're like, we as Africans have to come together and do XYZ. We have to support the development of, Africa as Africans ourselves or whatever. And it's like, motherfucker, you like grew up in London.
Yeah.
Like you went to Oxford. Right. You own a fancy lad estate that has like 500 rooms where you force servants. It's like the fucking Europa universe from the Watchmen TV series we were watching, where there's like all the clones that are made to like service the estate. Like you're forcing these people to go out and like farm parsnips or whatever in a sustainable way. So when the fucking kids come around from whatever horrible private school in the UK, you can be like, that's a parsnip. You boil it. Just like disgusting wretches of human beings. Like, and again, to go back to the beginning, like this was Cecil Rhodes' vision,
right?
Like a generation.
Yeah, this is what he wanted,
of like, you know, these masterful Anglo-Saxons, and you know, and they're just standing there like weak-kneed, being like, cabbage this season. All right, you gotta crush Maduro. We got to put out another article on Maduro. Get the CIA black site torturer from Afghanistan. Put him in charge.
The one thing, the accent is a little bit more Australian, I think, than South African.
It is a touch Australian.
It's a touch Australian, yeah.
Just
same thing.
Just some notes for you, okay?
Yeah, they're all the same.
Trying to help.
When I try to do the white South African accent, in my mind I'm thinking Australian, but somehow more racist. That's all that's going on. And I'm sorry, but like, you know, if you're the inheritors of that, like, you know, century plus of just exploitation, genocide, resource extraction, and just all of the undue wealth, like, you know, I don't know.
Just go be quiet.
At bare minimum, take a seat.
Yeah.
Like, you have all the money in the world. Like you were saying, Chris, like, you know, some, you know, jack off grandson in Monte Carlo. You could just do that.
Yeah, just shut up.
Just go hang out.
I think the Habsburg heir is like a Formula One race car driver in Monte Carlo. He doesn't fucking talk about anything because he's got all the money in the world. He can do whatever the fuck he wants.
God, I wish that were me.
You know, but it's the hubris and the need to be like, you know, we actually everything we do is good.
Right.
And also, we have a few suggestions for governments on how you can do it.
Well, because they're important, right? They're important people, and people need to know what they think. That's the idea.
Right. I learned a lot in the business, you know? I've learned a lot. There's a picture. If you go to Nikki Oppenheimer's Wikipedia page, the picture for it, and I'll just send it to you guys here.
Oh, boy.
It's from 2006. And it's him talking to Vladimir Putin.
Oh, there he is. There's our boy.
And it's just like, why? Why do you even have an in there?
Yeah,
and it's merely because, again, like, I chose my parents well.
Yep.
I feel like the look that Putin is giving him is like, I don't even know.
He looks like he's sick of his shit.
So I wish I was back in the good old days.
Yeah. It looks like he's very judgmental of him in a sort of way, which, I mean, they both sort of, I don't know.
What is that picture from? Like, why were they speaking?
How did they, I don't understand.
What's the connection here? 2006.
Well, because Nikki Oppenheimer is a world thought leader.
Oh.
There actually is a line. Hold on, I'm really quick, and then we can get to the kind of more wrap up thing. But if you go to the Brent Hearst Foundation website right now, and you go to our story, right? I'm just gonna read. This is like the line here, right? New ideas and innovative actions for strengthening Africa's economic performance. We facilitate policy conversations. Our team engages with experts, policy specialists, and senior government officials in Africa and beyond. Our activities focus on private events, policy advice, thought leadership.
Oh, come on, man.
We work at the invitation of African governments.
Okay.
Again, I mean, these are people who, you know, even by his own admission, he has no right to even claim like good businesses,
right? He literally just
whatever,
inherited
right? Like,
it. Yeah.
Here's the picture of fucking Nikki and Jonathan together on the website, and it's clearly photoshopped in because they couldn't even take the time to take a fucking picture.
They can't
together.
stand each other.
Yeah,
I would love
almost
that.
certainly.
I would love to know that.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, De Beers. Would you believe it? Evil.
Not great.
You know, a diamond is forever, but this episode is not.
I'll tell you one thing, the Oppenheimers are not forever.
That's right. Well,
that's absolutely right.
That's true.
I think, you know, in the somewhat lost tradition of this show, and thinking of like what would be the punishment or whatever.
Oh yeah.
I could
reflect on this family.
What's the punishment?
I would say that the Oppenheimers have to face the Oppenheimer, and by that I mean Robert Oppenheimer, one of the nuclear physicists who developed the atomic bomb. I think it would be interesting to see what happens, when you put a diamond, in the center of a thermonuclear device. An unstoppable force meets an unmovable object.
You can't outrun the blast radius from that. You could try.
And on that note. You cannot fuck!
We got it. It's good. It's fine.
That's it.
Fine.
All right.
Good
Okay,
night, everybody. I gotta go to work tomorrow.
Give me 3 months' salary. That's our new slogan for the show. Me personally. Otherwise, you don't really. Otherwise, you don't really love her.
Who is it? Nobody knows. Whoever you're thinking of.
Nobody knows.
That's a threat.
The girl that's reading this. Okay. All
right.
This is over. All right. Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Good night, folks. Stay cool.
I love you more.
I love you the most.
Diamonds are forever. They are all I need to please me. They can stimulate and tease me. They won't leave in the night. I've no fear that they might desert me. Diamonds are forever. Hold one up and then caress it. Touch it, stroke it and undress it. I can see every part. Nothing hides in the heart to hurt me. I don't need love. For what good will love do me? Diamonds never lie to me. For when love's gone, they'll last on. Diamonds are forever, sparkling round my little finger. Unlike men, the diamonds linger.
My goodness.
Never
Cut that.
heard that?
Cut
Okay.
that.
Well, obviously, all of this is cut.
No, leave it all in, baby.